as we discuss abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. We pray, Lord, that you will help us to see that in you, you give us peace. And if there is anyone out there, God, who hearing my voice is experiencing any type of abuse, we want to pray, God, that you will be near to that person and that you will intervene in that home and you will bring relief. For your word says, I wish above all things that you will prosper and be in health. And 3 John 2 also reminds us that above all, God desires that we have peace. And we know that peace is not just the absence of war or conflict, but it is physical, spiritual, social, emotional. So bless us this afternoon. Bless our presenters. Bless every question that will be asked and every response that will be elicited. And we pray that at the end of it, we will be better equipped to deal with abuse inside the church. So have your divine way, Lord. We ask these mercies and give you thanks. In Jesus' name, amen.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening.
Good evening. We can hear you, Sister Simone.
All right. It is a pleasure and a privilege for the members of the Society of Adventist Academic Professionals to bring to you part 3 of the program, Abuse and the Church, presented under the theme, Psychological and Physical Abuse and the Church. I want to say a hearty welcome to you all. The issue of abuse is one that is well known across the spheres around the world, and our people have also experienced abuse in some form or the other. Abuse is so privileged that the World Health Organization in its data said that 1 in every 3 women are abused. In their research, Teague, Mazzarelli, LaRose, and Sanderson have revealed that child abuse is on the rise. Notwithstanding, we also have males or men who have experienced some form of abuse. And so abuse is not something that should be taken lightly. It's not a matter that should be swept under the rugs. As such, this pertinent issue is being addressed. And in today's episode of our program, we have a group of learned panelists who are going to address this very important issue and bring to our knowledge a better awareness and understanding of abuse and how we can combat it. I want to give you this quote. It says from Bancroft, it says, "The scars from mental cruelty can be as deep and long-lasting as wounds and flaps. It is therefore very evident that psychological abuse is just as bad as physical abuse." And so we're going to leave you in the hands of our well-abled panelists as they bring to you today's program. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mrs. Prophet, Sister Prophet. Um, Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from the Sunshine State of Florida. Am honored to introduce to you this afternoon our moderator, Elder Dennis H. Coffey. The H is for Hilbert. Mr. Coffey is from Guyana. He was born in the beautiful country of Guyana. He's married. He is currently an adult educator and a life coach and a workshop facilitator. He has a passion for working with adults and inspiring adults to reach their full potential and, uh, and to realize their dreams and to realize that they have the ability to make progress in their lives. Mr. Elder Coffey has attended Caribbean Union College, now Southern Caribbean University. He has an undergraduate degree in behavioral science, a minor in religion. He also holds a master's degree in adult and continuing education from the University of the West Indies. In addition to his academic credentials, Elder Coffey is a life coach, received training in life coaching from the Trinidad and Tobago Life Coaching Association, the psychological first aid and the community resilience training from the renowned Loma Linda University, Behavior and Trauma Department. Elder Coffey is also a certified volunteer trained by the Diego Martin Regional Corporation and have been a volunteer and a facilitator for the psychology and disaster trauma, disaster model there. He uses his skills and his ability to benefit the people that he come in contact with every day, and that is the Caribbean people. He is indeed a son of the Caribbean. In addition to all of that, Elder Coffey finds time to he enjoys reading biblical characters of the Old Testament. He's also an avid gardener. He's a bird watcher. I think that's a default hobby for anyone who attends Caribbean Union College, bird watching. He enjoys everything aviation, and he also enjoys boating. I did not see cricket there. I guess he's working on that skill. Hopefully, I can have an updated bio moving forward. Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed panelists, our viewing audience, it's an honor to introduce my friend, Elder Coffey. Elder Coffey, it's over to you.
Thank you, Elder Edwari. Thank you so much for your kind words. And at another forum, we will take care of some business. May God continue to bless you. Let me share with you about our esteemed presenters this afternoon. We begin with Sister Beverly Bradford Chand is an ordained elder of the Central Seventh-day Adventist Church. She's a first-class trained teacher, certified family life educator, leader, manager, family counselor, high court mediator, all for which she has the requisite training. She's an ardent church worker in a number of leadership positions, along with her work in several leading positions at the national, regional, and with international agencies. This multi-award recipient, which includes a Woman of Distinction Award, spent 18 years working in the area of sexual and reproductive health and gender equality at the Guyana Responsible Parenthood Association, Western Hemisphere region, where for 4 years she represented that organization at the United Nations at a conference on the status of women after the Beijing Conference on the Status of Women and Gender in September 1995. She currently serves as the Chief Executive Officer of Davis Memorial Hospital and is a committed member of the UN Global Spotlight Initiative on Domestic Violence. Bev, as she's familiarly called, is known for her candid talk about the rough side of relationships while sharing her own life stories in real time. She is a mother, wife, and homemaker. So that's one of our presenters. You will notice this afternoon, we have the privilege of having a female presenter amongst uh, the men. Allow me to share with you the profile of another presenter, Dr. Oscar Noel Ocho. Started off his career as a nursing assistant trainee at San Fernando General Hospital in 1981. He's also a qualified RN and currently serves as the director, the University of the West Indies School of Nursing, St. Augustine. He was a public servant for 34 years prior to joining the faculty at UA. His academic qualifications include a BSN Education, the UWI, Mona, Jamaica, 1995, a Master in Public Health, International Health, University of Washington, Seattle, USA, 2005, and MPhil in Sociology at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine, Trinidad, 2007, and the doctorate in public health with an emphasis on public health and policy in 2013. And finally, allow me to also introduce our third presenter, Dr. Curtis A. Fox was born in Trinidad and Tobago. He's an ordained minister who began pastoral ministry in South Caribbean Conference. He's a graduate of the University of Southern Caribbean, where he earned a Bachelor's of Arts degree in theology. He holds a Master of Science degree in marriage and family and therapy from Loma Linda University, a PhD degree in child and family studies from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. He last worked as professor and chair of the Department of Counseling and Family Sciences at Loma Linda University from 1999 to 2016 before moving to Georgia. Dr. Curtis Fox is a member of several professional organizations and does research on adolescent development, clergy families, and physician families and marital relationships. He's a licensed marital and family therapist in California and Georgia, and is a certified family life educator by the National Council on Family Relations. He's actively involved in family ministries and conducts seminars and workshops all around the world. Dr. Fox is the CEO and Director of Clinical Services through the Integrative Health and Wellness, and serves as Senior Pastor of Conyers SDA Church in Conyers, Georgia. Dr. Fox is married to the former Paula Jacob. Paula practices family medicine in Conyers, Georgia. They have 3 children, Dana, Anthony, and Treasure. They love home care, cooking, and entertaining, and mission service. Ladies and gentlemen, I've given to you the credentials and the background on our presenters. The purpose of doing this is to allow you or to afford you the understanding that the individuals who will share this afternoon, who will present, they're eminently qualified to do so. And we value your involvement. And that is why these individuals have been contacted and have agreed to be a part of this experience, number 3 today. May God bless us as we move forward in this experience today. And at a particular time, appropriate time, we're going to have the question and answer segment, and you'll be guided accordingly. This first session is going to be divided into 2 sessions. The first session, we're going to have Sister Beverly Chan and Dr. Ocho presenting. And the second session, after we come back after commercial break, and we would also have a special item between the two sessions. We are going to hear from Dr. Fox. At this time, I would like to invite Sister Beverly Chan, the lady, to go first in this segment. And welcome, Sister Chan, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you very much, Elder Cuffy. Thank you for your kind remarks. And it's indeed an honor and a pleasure to be part of this interesting, I should say, conversation this afternoon. I am a storyteller. I have been working in the area of domestic violence for over 25 years. In fact, I should let you know, my passion for the work in this area came as a result at one phase in my life when I was the administrator of the Women's Affairs Bureau here in Guyana. A number of our own church members were coming to the Bureau for help. I think, Elder Coffee, you know those days, huh? And I was taken back by surprise that they're looking for help on the outside. And the volume, the number of women who came with all kinds of abusive help were from our different churches within the city. And so I went back to the church, and at that time, Elder Garnett, certified family educator, he was running programs on family life. And I sat and I had this conversation with him. I'll be quick because I know my time is limited, about the number of women who are coming to church, looking good, singing and praying, and are going back to homes that are making them sick. And so he readily agreed that I start with him presentations on domestic violence in the church. Well, I tell you, at that time I became the enemy of the church. Okay, because this was breaking new ground, new territory, and bringing to the attention of the leadership the number of women who sit in the pews but are unhappy. As a result of that, I was sidelined. I was referred to as a feminist. I was referred to as these women who want to break the church up. But I thank God I did not pay attention to that, but continued the work. Now, the whole notion of physical abuse, which I'm asked to talk about from a passion, is reflected in all kinds of external and also internal damages to the body, whether it's male or female. But you know right now, it is mainly women who suffers this. And so you have them with the blue eyes, the black and blue eyes, the scratches, the broken parts of their body, both external and internal, and this can even lead to death. We know that. But let me tell you about women as the great cover-up when it comes to physical abuse. The physical scars that they carry as a result of the abuse is often covered. In their face, if it's the eye, they seem to put the hair right over the eye so that wouldn't show very much. If it's the arm, they ensure that something pretty covers that mark, and so on. But let me share with you one experience I had at the hospital where the woman came, she had a broken jaw, and well, almost broken jaw, but her teeth, one of her, a tooth was damaged. She came to the dentist. But because the dentist was smart, he brought her over and said, this looked like this is a case of domestic violence. But the young lady told an excellent story as to how she got that damage. She was climbing to assist her husband in building the house, and she fell to the ground and damaged the tooth. And so he brought her to me, knowing my other hat that I wear. And I sat down and she told the same story. But by the way, the husband was at the hospital walking everywhere behind her. Well, those were my red flags. And what actually happened, she told me the same story about falling from the ladder. And I asked her, well, tell me, from the ladder, is the only place that got hurt was that tooth? She said, yes. No other marks around your body? No. And so I said to her, thank you for telling me that story. But now you're going to tell me the real story. and she broke into tears because she realized that the story wasn't holding up with somebody who is experienced in working in the area of domestic violence and know what the signs are. And then she told the whole story. Well, we immediately gave her the attention that she needed and begin to link her to get help. We took her to help and shelter and move her and the children to a safe place. But here's the story. The story didn't end there. She came away from the place, found everything that was wrong with it, and back into the arms of her husband, who by that time now, for those of us who are aware of the cycle of this violence, was quite nice and asking forgiveness, and it will never, ever happen again. And so the institutions just step back and allow her to go back into that situation. And so the whole notion of domestic violence is that, well, should I say education, information? It needs more than that. It needs what I would call programs that are has a width, a depth, and intensity that will help women and obviously men to be able to address the area of the physical. Remember, I'm dealing with physical abuse, but there's a network with the physical, the emotional, the psychological. To me, they're wrapped in one package. But I'm going to stick to the physical aspect of it. Women are such great cover girls, okay? And it's hard for them. They go to work and they cannot perform as they will. I work also do this social education program for a number of our banking institutions. And one of the things that worries me is that these persons must face the public with smiles and all the graciousness and everything, and they are paining inside and also covering up themselves from the physical abuse. It also traumatizes them when people come into the institution looking like the perpetrator. And then, well, that's another emotional trauma that they go into that I'm not going to get into at this point in time. But physical abuse, okay, is a public affair. We call it domestic violence. There's nothing domestic about that, all right? Everything about that is public because it has implications for the work environment. Absenteeism is very high as a result. Of course, they don't tell you this happening at home, but they report sick, all right? It has financial implications for the healthcare sector. Okay, it has implications for the relationship with their children. And the story goes on and on that physical abuse, right, should not have its place. And as we get into our conversation, we can say more about this. But I'm certain that my 15 minutes is up because we can just probably skim the surface of it and hope that the other aspects of the implications of the physical abuse we'll be able to tell that part of the story. So for me, I'm very passionate, and sometimes more than passionate, even angry, because a recent encounter, and let me wrap this up now, was where a couple going to church after abuse at home, walks to the front of the church and sit down and say her face was really in pain. But what did he do? He touched her. Smile. Smile. Why are you not smiling? How on earth could she smile? She needs to smile in church because the church is a place where you ought to smile. You ought to be happy. You ought to talk about the Lord. If you can't smile and you can't sing with the passion, it is because you maybe not a good Christian. Maybe you're not praying. Maybe something is wrong with you that you cannot demonstrate what it is. You know what? Women, they come to church. The church is a place of rescue, but we have no beds there for all of them to stay. And many of them are going back to homes that are making them sick. My personal goal in this life, in this work is that women and men must go to church to be able to serve God in spirit and in truth, okay? Some of them, they are going to church, but their spirit is somewhere out there, and truth is an illusion to them. I thank you, And I want to congratulate all those who took time out to join us to be part of this great conversation. Thank you for the privilege of your time. Elder Coffey.
Thank you so much, Elder Beverly Chan. Tremendous indeed, sharing from personal experiences, sharing what the reality is. There's one thing to have the theory, but when you're in the trenches and you know what's going on, thank you for your perseverance and your persistence in really representing what God wants you to represent, bringing love and peace to families. Dr. Ocho, we're going to go to you. Were you given the privilege to share? We are going to go to you, Dr. Ocho. Thereafter, I will move to my brother Etwaru, and then he would, technical staff, could you assist Dr. Ocho? Let me see if I can assist you from where I am. And you can try now, Dr. Ocho. All right.
Great. Thank you so much, Elder Coffey, and thank you so much, Elder Chan, for your presentation. And I really want to commend the Society of Adventist Academic Professionals for this series, because I think we are dealing with something that must be dealt with and something that is very real, but at the same time, that is very complex and complicated within the context of the Caribbean. And I continue to say that because in the year 2000, WHO identified domestic violence as a public health issue. And of course, as we would have moved on, to become more gender sensitive, they are focused on things more like intimate partner violence because of the issues that I guess we are seeing in the Caribbean as well. The fact that we have a number of same-gender relationships that has implications even for the church. But I want to also remind us that abuse is not dichotomized to the extent that we could speak to women as the victims and men as the perpetrators. And very often, while there may be a higher level of reporting of female being victims of abuse, having less men report being abused does not mean that less men are being abused. And the reason why I talk about this not being dichotomized is the fact that very often when we talk of abuse, while it is very easy for us to speak about the physical abuse because it's tangible, it could be seen, it could be measured, and it could be treated. The reality is psychological abuse has to some extent greater long-term implications, because while an individual could be healed from the scars, from the physical injuries, very often it is so damaging and challenging that it affects the person's entire psyche, their social health, as well as their physical health when it comes to having to contend with the issues of psychological abuse. Only this morning, I was making a presentation on family health to a group, and one person retorted. She said, "I am so damaged." She said, "because I keep hearing from everybody that I'm not good." And while we were on and I was engaging her, some of the persons on the program started to validate her. And you know what she said? She said, "Well, I am so surprised." She said, "But it feels good because I never knew." So here is someone who always felt that she was so bad because of the nuances that were associated with what she was told all the years. And therefore she started to believe, and she confessed that she has ended up with mental health challenges that are associated with the years of believing what she was told. And you see, in psychology, we talk about the self-fulfilling prophecy. And how do we deal with that within the context of the Caribbean? And I'm speaking here within the context of the Caribbean, when abuse is culturally nuanced. So that you would find that our children grow up in homes where it is normal and normative for them to hear things like, "You're stupid, you're dotish, you wouldn't amount to anything, you make me embarrassed, you'll come out just like your father." Because the message that is given is that I want you to do better. In fact, that's the intent of the message. I want you to be better than you are. I don't want you to make the same mistakes that the others who have gone before you has made. But while the intent of the message is in their heads, the reality is the message that is given is so culturally nuanced that for many persons, they see absolutely nothing wrong, because this is how we talk, this is how we behave, this is how we get our messages out. So on the one hand, we have an intent of a message, and on the other hand, we have a reality for the person to whom that message is directed is hearing something that is totally different to what is intended. And after a while, what do we have? The amount of persons who are so psychologically abused, what it becomes very easy then for them to find themselves in situations and in circumstances where they need validation, where they want to be loved, where they want to be cared for. And very often they find themselves gravitating to environments and to individuals who by extension may start off as sheep, until they realize that they're really wolves in sheep clothing, because the cycle of that psychological abuse could also be extended to the issue of physical abuse as well. So that we are dealing with a socio-culturally nuanced issue that very often we find ourselves extremely challenged to treat and to contend with, because if something is considered socially acceptable, then how do we treat with it from the perspective even of the church? And the reason why I talk about abuse being culturally nuanced, very often even as a church, we do not realize how we continue the cycle of psychological abuse on the very vulnerable. Many persons are so fractured in our society. They are coming from homes, they are coming from workplaces, they are coming from social environments where everything about them is about accentuating the negatives. And when people come to the Church of the Living God, they are coming with so much baggage, and they are hoping that there would be such a spiritual experience that will allow for catharsis of feelings, that will allow them to be able to connect with themselves and their God in a special way that will allow for some measure of psychological healing. But very often, what do we get? Here we have individuals, and I've heard the stories over and over and over again, where the space is created for people to come for counseling. And as they come for counseling, the next thing you would experience is that your story is the reference story in the sermon from the pulpit. And of course, you have very curious members who may have heard some things in the grapevine, who may be talking behind your backs. And in fact, there are many individuals who they are sharing and unburdening their emotional pain, and they are looking for that psychological and social network to support them. And here is the good sister, that faithful deaconess or elder, who would go to the other member and say, remember, you are the only person I'm telling this. If I hear it from anybody, I will say, you lie. And so what happens? We continue in an attempt to present ourselves as caring. We continue to share the person's story and what is happening, a set of moving along and a set of talk. And the person is walking, and that person goes up there and stands before the pulpit and encourages the brethren. Oh, brethren, be faithful. Soon Jesus will come. And sometimes you see the snickering. Sometimes you see the person putting their hand and knocking the person at the waistline. Yes, and sometimes in nonverbal, speaks so loudly that the person sometimes develop a level of unease with the particular situation. And in fact, we do not see that as the continuation of psychological abuse. Or we have to contend with things in the church where every day you're reminded of what a sinner you are, when after all, the church should be the hospital for sinners. In fact, as a nurse myself, having worked in this profession for 40 years, even nurses who are sick have to care for the patient who is ill. Sometimes the nurses have the same complaint that the patient has, but that doesn't mean that the nurse has to say, well, I'm sick too, so I cannot take care of you. So when that person may be struggling with some kind of emotional trauma, and they are looking to God, who is their help in ages past, and somehow sometimes they feel as though God is so far away. They feel as though I've been praying for this for umpteen years, and God is not coming through. And sometimes we tend to make people feel as though it's your fault. We tend to make people feel as though you just, or sometimes we become so insensitive that we will just say, go and pray about it. Go and pray about it. And sometimes we fail to realize the level of emotional damage that our brethren are experiencing, that what they need sometimes is that professional hand to hold them. And the final nuanced issue that I wish to speak about, and I come back to where I would have started, in our socio-cultural context, we talk about the social support systems. But who are the target persons for the social support system? I dare say, in my thesis, is that from a socio-cultural context, we cater for the women, but not for the men. If you look at the UN themed agenda, even coming out of the International Conference on Population and Development held in Cairo, Egypt in 1994, where the whole concept of sexual and reproductive health was defined beyond family planning. If you look at that voluminous document, the focus was on the empowerment of women. The focus was on creating spaces and support systems so that women could find solace and women could find that synergy to be able to deal with the problems and the challenges and the focus of men on men in a very surreptitious way was on greater involvement to support women. And I'm saying that because from our context, how could a man who is being psychologically abused, who is living in a house with a female who is never satisfied with anything? Just recently, I was dealing with a young man. He said, Brother Oscar, I am 34 now, my business is climbing. He said, I am now ready to have 2 children. He said, but I'm married for 9 years. He said, but for 9 years, I have been experiencing abuse. And nobody knew, not even my parents, and he lived downstairs, his parents. If you see his wife, she is a figure 1. She is as thin as you can get it. She is a professional who never worked for the 9 years. He took care of her. They bought land together. She has her own vehicle. But he said the last nail in the coffin was on the 27th of December when I got such a hit in my groin. He said I had to go to the hotel and spend the night in a hotel, and I had to decide I need to get out. Why should a young man carry the trauma of abuse for 9 years? The answer is left up to us. We have not created the space that will allow for confidentiality and that will allow for the free and the protected rather space where men, just like women, could share and feel supported. I think my time is up. Thanks for having me here.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Ocho. On point, wonderfully presented and done. Excellent indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you have heard quite a bit and you are already impressed with what you're hearing. And I would turn us over to my brother Edwaro, and he's going to guide the next process.
Thank you, Elder Coffee. Thank you to our presenter who just presented there, Dr. Ocho. As he mentioned, this is very complex. It's a nuanced subject of our time, and hence we have lots of questions. Question 1 for our panelists: how can we prevent psychological and physical abuse in the church? Straightforward question. How can we prevent psychological and physical abuse in the church? Another question from our audience: can victims of physical abuse be psychological abusers themselves, thus contributing to physical abuse? Those are 2 questions I would throw out to our panelists and get some feedback.
For your very first question, how do we prevent psychological abuse in the church? The answer is not simple. And the reason why I say the answer is not simple, because very often some of our leaders are themselves so happy to be in leadership because that's the only time they feel a sense of empowerment and control. And as a result, because of their sense of empowerment and control, the pulpit or the rostrum is often used as that space where they can feel powerful, and therefore it is part of massaging their own ego. And therefore the church has to look very carefully at who do we put in positions of leadership, because fractured people will continue to fracture others. But the challenge that we face is when you are dealing with a church where a family is dominant, or you are dealing with a church where the membership is so small that one person becomes the church board. It becomes extremely difficult to treat with. And therefore, what we need to do in circumstances like that is to ensure that we create programs and develop programs like these to sensitize people, because a lot of people are not aware of what they're doing and the impact that it is having on the membership.
Mhm. May I? Hello,
Yes,
may I?
Sister Chan. Yes, go ahead.
Yes. Let me congratulate Doctor for a very, very good intervention and the complex nature and the relationship between all the dynamics of psychological abuse. There's a relationship, a correlation between physical abuse and psychological abuse, because as the physical actions are taking place, there's a lot of emotional and inappropriate things that are said in that context. But you're going to have people being psychologically abused without being physical abuse. But I want to put another spin on this, okay? Right? This is very complex. And I had stopped for a while working and talking, even though I'm going to do it right now, on domestic violence. And as I listened to the blame game, and there's a video out where a church leader is saying that many of you may have seen it, that the woman's mouth is responsible for the reaction in a physical way from the male. I am not into this blame game, because we can go on and on. The man can't manage his anger, so he lashes out. She can't manage her mouth, so he lashes out. I am of the fundamental belief that the complex nature of the relationship is much for persons to handle. All right? Men and women are profoundly different. We do not understand these differences. We do not know that our differences were made to complement each other. But we use our differences to become indifferent to each other. Right? So she is talking from her perspective. He is hearing it from his perspective. And these differences are clashes unless the church begins to take up the role of helping us to understand that we are profoundly different and we are there to complement each other. That started in Eden. This will never end. You know, I did a presentation, and I do lots of presentation on living with differences, right? I think that it makes not a whole lot of sense for a man or a woman to leave one partner and take another, except it's in the area of abuse, right? Because you have to deal with the same differences, maybe a different type of difference, but the method of dealing with differences is consistent, right? We have different backgrounds, different personalities, different communication styles, difference in ages, different in education, different in every single thing. And when these differences, when we come together and they get married or they get into the same partnership, right? These differences become very complex to handle, and the spin-over from it is all forms and kinds of abuse, right? Everybody is screaming for help. And I realized as a counselor over the years, we need counselors and help agents and Dr. Ocho said, who are these people that they're going to help? Great question, because they don't understand it too. They don't even understand themselves and the dynamics of their own relationship. So how can they even help? All right. A good help, whether it's male or female, must be able to hear the man and the woman at the same time, even though you're speaking to one, right? Let me give you a little scenario, okay? I'm taking this a little bit. I was counseling a woman, female. I listened to her. But while she was talking, I was hearing how much she was misleading the husband, how she was reading him incorrectly. And I said to her, which I don't usually do, I would like to talk to your husband. She said he wouldn't come. He wouldn't come. He doesn't want to hear anybody. I said, but it's important. I know for me, he was trying his best, but she was reading it wrong. Anyway, she said she'd be happy if he can come. So I called him. I invited him for a 15-minute chat. I couldn't put it down because I remember he doesn't want to come. So he came and I greeted him quite nicely. And I sat down and we spent 3 hours together. What was the bottom line? He was really trying his best, but there was cross communication. What was her value system? What was her needs? He was addressing it in a different way. And you know what? The story is ended. They're now living together. She is now able to appreciate what he's doing in his world, and he is now able to understand what she needs there. This thing is not about a bad person, a bad woman, a bad man. Okay? It also has implications. And one of the things, let me make a switch here quickly on this, all right? Okay? One of the things, even with this abuse network, right? More often than not, when people are courting, when they're courting, and this honeymoon and this nice period, okay? These signs are more often than not on the burden. I call them the blinking red light. Because, but they don't see, because love, they don't see nor hear. Because love, in the context of the love, what they understand is also not only, it's not only blind. You say love is blind, but it's also deaf. I walk on the seawall. Seawall is I love the coffee loves the bird, I love the ocean. And one afternoon I saw a young girl sitting on the seawall and a young man was there, right? Okay, a young man was there. And whatever it was, she out her hand and gave him one slap and turned his face. I saw it. He smiled and I'm saying, hey, he has no idea he's setting himself up for a life of violence and abuse. Okay, so he didn't hear that. Okay, somebody asked on the chat if I'm married. I've been married for 40 long years. All right, and I've worked with people and I've studied this phenomenon. It was part of my education training, right? So when you put, and I also know what God says about it in the Genesis chapter, but I'm not going to talk about that now. And thy husband shall rule over thee. So yes, Dr. you are right, okay? And psychological abuse is a trauma that only if you have experienced it, you can relate to it. Again, as somebody said in the chat, hurt people. And so the cycle of this pain continues. And not that people don't know, but knowing what is the capacity, okay? What's the cause that they're hooked? Well, we know there are a lot of causes that keep people bind to this in the abusive situation. Talk about it, right? Okay. And as we continue, we'll get more. But as Doctor said, this is deep and wide. Some people say, and by the way, right, I get in trouble with my own social workers here sometimes when I talk about the need for men to be engaged more deeply in the conversation. I love to engage men, all right? As a matter of fact, when women's ministries, they've got programs and men show up, I allow those women to validate those men. We give them gifts. We thank them for coming, because it isn't an easy thing for a man or a group of women are going to sit there and gab, and they have the courage and the resilience to come and sit and listen. We validate them and we make sure that they feel a part of, because the information that is good for one is equally good for the other. We have to be able to help people to hear each other in a safe environment with a great facilitator, that you don't enter into a war zone, because if you're not able to manage that, that can happen, to protect the integrity of the man, and also to protect the safe space for the woman. The thing about it is that you cannot blame men for feeling the way they feel, all right? Because the whole notion of the evolution of women's empowerment, okay, was at the expense of the emotions of men. Men were psychologically battered towards women's empowerment. I get in trouble sometimes with my own colleagues when I say that, but it is reality. You cannot be serving God one at the expense of the other, all right? We have to find a way, and the information is there, right? But information alone doesn't change behavior. Knowledge alone, and we know by now, knowledge is not, we say knowledge is power. Now we know that knowledge has to be applied, because knowing and not doing equals not knowing, all right? So it has to be, there's got to be a shift in paradigm. Also, if you're going to invite a man to participate, for God's sake, don't call it, we're going to talk about abuse. Don't call it, we're going to talk about a violence. You shut them out. You have to find creative ways, okay, and respectfully so, to have men engage and feel safe. Because anytime we know we had, okay, I'm going to do this now. We had one era where the men had all the power. Okay, we dealt with that. Now, if we're going to have the cycle where women have all the power, my position is this: the enemy, the devil, doesn't care who is in power, whether it's the man or the woman, because anything that is out of balance is out of order. And so the discord, right? If the enemy says, okay, men are losing it, less in school, they're going to the bottom, and they're going to use all kinds of abuse to stay in power, okay? So the women are climbing. That's a masterpiece of the enemy, okay? He's not going to win anyway, because he's not going to lose anyway. He's trying not to, okay? So put this relationship out of balance, and he is the victor in between. I rest my case at this point. The coffee? Or Dr. Ricky?
Oh, thank you, Sister Chan, for addressing our audience question. We are running a tight ship as per our moderator. So I have room for one more question from our listening audience, and I will read the question verbatim. Here is the question. How can one detect the verbal signs of abuse apart from the physical signs? And how can a minister recognize psychological abuse if there is not a willingness or a refusal owing to fear or embarrassment to share?
Well, the reality is there are no clear signs of psychological abuse. But in general, what you want to do is to look and see behaviors. If there is somebody who was accustomed to be very gregarious and outgoing, is that person becoming a social recluse? Is that person after church who will normally be greeting the brethren? Does the person have to hustle to sit in the car and wait? Is the person not as socially engaging as the person normally would? Is it that you find that if you call, the person cannot answer the phone, or the person will be speaking in hushed tones and talking about, I can't talk to you now, call me back, call me back. You know, there are certain telltale signs you might be able to pick up, but again, you cannot be so hypersensitive that everything or you're trying to put an interpretation to. But I think in general, there are no signs, but you could look at some general behaviors to see if there are changes from a social perspective.
Mr. Beverly,
Well,
you can.
we were trained, sorry, we were definitely trained to be cover girls, cover up, okay, to look good on the outside, all right, and to give this awesomeness. And men too, you know, there was one time years ago where there was an elder who would greet you very early to church, warm, well dressed in tie, and he was having sex with his stepdaughter. And nobody could have been nicer to you at the front of the door, all right? But even as the church, okay, when I started this work in the church, and I said before, I was ostracized and no elders never wanted their wives to talk to me, and the rest is history, okay, all right? We were taught to cover it up in the church because it will look bad. The church will get a bad name. But I have a different perspective on that, okay? Because the church is God's church. He is the protector. Are you going to contain this? Contain this? No, I'm not saying you got to go put it in the press, put it in the newspaper, put it on TV. No, but to cover it down, okay, it's only a matter of time. It's sitting on a time bomb, all right. When it pervades itself in the church as it has done today, right? Then it's become more difficult to control, all right. So we were trained to cover to protect the image of the church, all right. And so we're not going to talk about it. But for me, you respect a church, you respect a leader who, when these things are at your attention, is that you deal with it in a safe and appropriate manner to bring healing and country. That's a church to respect. That's a church to go to. That's a pastor, that's a leader that you want. Okay. But more often than not, to protect the church and to protect the leader, then we cover it down. And that doesn't do us very well. I know for sure. God doesn't want this to happen to us. That's not his desire for us. But we think, I always tell them, okay, we think that we are better than God when we are addressing inappropriate behavior. There's a way to do it, all right? And anybody, for me, in my sphere, who wants to cover and never mind, I think that God, they're trying to better God because there are logical consequences for inappropriate behavior, regardless of who it is. I mean, look, we know David and we know the Bible. The Bible is such an open and transparent book. We admire how God dealt with it. God told David, your sword shall not remove from your door for what you did. But you know what? God walks with us through these consequences. He loves us along the way. So even as you do the logical thing that you ought to do, then there's mercy, right? There's grace. That person is not outcast, all right? There's a redemptive action, but the consequences is in place. The consequences are in place. If you are going to be redemptive before the consequences, you really got it a little bit back to front, okay? So we have to be able to do what we do, right? And because I counsel husbands and wives in churches, and people don't even know who's who. Okay, the wife sometimes don't even know. The wife doesn't even know. All right, the level, and you make both the man. If the man is talking to you, he's got to feel safe. All right. And so the same thing with the women. So the church has now. I'm not going to tell you something. The church is trying. Okay. The church is trying. More and more ministers are getting into the area of family counseling, family life, and helping. Okay, so I'm not bashing the church because they're trying. Okay, but it's taking more time because it's so widespread. Okay, it's so deep and so complex. It's taking a while to make the turnaround that we're looking for. I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Very well said. There's a little pause, so I started to, yes, Elder Eduardo.
Do we have room for one more question?
We would want to.
Okay.
Let me just ask the question. Go ahead. ask the question.
The question is, this is another question from our viewing audience, and I'm glad that you have the time to put your question in the chat box. Here's the question. Is it that the church or the Christian church's philosophy on social change have transformed to economic change and prosperity as the main motto? Question to our panelists.
No, that's an interesting question.
It is.
From a Seventh-day Adventist perspective, I would say no, because our theology generally has remained the same, and we do not preach prosperity gospel, but we focus on stewardship. I don't think we could say the same, though, for some of the other churches, because they speak to investment, they speak to sowing a seed, they speak to a prosperity type gospel, which will give the impression that if people are not prosperous, it is because they are not blessed. As Seventh-day Adventists, we still believe that God sends the rain on the just and the unjust. We still believe that the poor we will have with us always. And that's why the structure of the church is such that we continue to cater to the needs of the brethren, because we are sensitive to the fact that not all of us will be on the same socio-economic plane. And the church has a social responsibility. I think what the church has to be careful with, though, is that we do not become so socially engaged to the point that we no longer know what we believe, but we have a feel-good gospel where people no longer understand the difference between sin and righteousness. Yeah.
What a thing. Sister Chan, you responded, right?
I don't want to complicate
Yes.
Go ahead, Doctor.
All right. So thank you so much. Thank you both for your responding to the question so ably, and based on the responses in the chat, people are really engaged and persons are engaged on the various platforms. So thank you. Well done, Elder Beverly Chan and Dr. Oscar Ocho. Well done. Thank you, Elder Eduardo, for feeding the questions and presenting them. At this time, we want to thank you, the audience, the viewing audience, and the listening audience, for being here with us. Remain with us. It's getting, as we go forward, we're getting more and more information. As we go forward, we are going to be more engaged. And at this time, we're going to have a brief, I repeat, we're going to have a brief commercial break as we get a word from our sponsors. And we are going to have a special musical item by Mr. Courtney Fadlin. Then when we return, we are going to hear from our next presenter. And when we get back, you're going to know Dr. Fox will take the stage and he will present to us. So stay with us right where you are. Thanks for being here. At this time, let me invite Sister Roblyn Bailey, one of the officers of SAP. Sister Bailey.
Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much to the presenters. At this time, we will be treated to a musical rendition by Brother Curtis Fadlin. He is an internationally renowned saxophonist. Technician, could you please put on the musical rendition for us? After that, I'll come back to give some promotions. Thank you.
Can anyone confirm that Brother Fadlin is with us?
All right, while we wait for our confirmation, I would like at this time to do a little promotion for the society. That's while we wait. Now, last week, Sister Elder Talisha Williams, and today we've heard from Elder Sister Chan and Dr. Ocho. Now, these three persons, I just want to single them out. They are professionals, right? And so I would want to ask you, professionals, Seventh-day Adventist professional in our viewership today. Have you been registered? Are you a part of this society of Seventh-day Adventist professionals? The question is, what are you waiting for? Now, we cannot allow our pastors and our elders alone to address the issues that are facing us in our membership. Right where you stand is God's vineyard, and we would like to hear what is happening there so that we can address. We can only address what we know. So if you are a professional, you ought to be a part of this dynamic group. This here, we can also consider the society as a think tank, right? For the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We are people, and because we are people, we are affected by various issues. And last week, in particular, we heard that abuse is a global issue. Hence, we need to hear more, not just about abuse, but what about unemployment? You might be in a position where you can train people to be employed. You can help people to be employed. Come on, you need to get on board. So you might be asking, what do I benefit from being a part of this organization? Well, I only want to share three things with you. The very first one is that you, being a part of this organization, will be sharing your gift with the world. You are going to be a service to God as well as to humanity, right? And so I think that should be your number one focus, right? And then the second thing is that once you are a member, you are eligible for a SAP, or a Society of Adventist Professionals Writing and Initiative Award. So you get benefits from it, right? And then the third thing is that you get a feeling of satisfaction, knowing that your dues go towards the support of our intellectual, our religious, as well as our social programs. The next question I guess you'll be asking, so how do I get involved? I will ask the technicians if they can drop the link in the chat so that you can make connection with us. But if you want right now, you can drop your email address or your phone number privately to one of us who are hosts or co-hosts. You can drop it to us, and we guarantee you that we are going to make contact with you within the next 24 hours. You can also join us or visit our page on Facebook and become a part of us. Those are the ways you can get involved. And please, when you come, seek out other professionals. You being on the ground can make a very great impact on the lives of the membership of Seventh-day Adventists, not just in your community, but globally. To the technician, do our song now by Curtis. Thank you very kindly for listening.
All right, thank you, Sister Bailey. Thank you so much. I think we're about ready with Brother Fadlin. Thank you.
How great is our God? Beautiful indeed, wonderful rendition. And thank you, Sister Bailey, for sharing with us. At this time, we are inviting Dr. Curtis Fox, who has been here with us from the beginning. And he's going to be sharing with us a very important aspect of our presentation on the causative factors of physical and psychological abuse. So over to you, Dr. Fox. Welcome once again. Wonderful seeing you here, and you can take the microphone.
Thank you so much, my brother. Thank you so much. And thank the society for the opportunity to share a bit on the subject as well. I want to thank Sister Chan and Dr. Ocho as well for the presentations. I was stimulated greatly by the conversation already. Here's what I want to say in beginning. I believe that a lot of abuse happens because people do not know how best to define abuse. And I think one of the things I try to do, especially with younger people, but certainly with all, is to sort of redefine what it is. What if we defined abuse as any behavior that is not respectful of the integrity of another human being? Any behavior that is not respectful of the integrity of another human being. I believe if we were to buy that at all, and I try to sell it, it is not always bought, then people would begin to understand and appreciate the fact, even as was alluded to earlier, that abuse begins long before abuse begins. So the physical manifestation of abuse, the swollen eyes, the black and blue, whatever, the skin and the discoloration, the broken stuffed tooth and whatever, in my mind, represent a part of a larger system of abuse that happens around the people and happen in our society. So that the joking couple whose, excuse me, girlfriend slapped him on the face, that he took with a smile, maybe was already beginning to realize the makings of that abuse, as Sister Chan said. But at a time when they were very much in love and having fun together, they thought it was okay. But abuse is any behavior that is not respectful of the integrity of another human being. And it does not always begin where it begins or where we assume it begins. So somebody asking you, I preached this morning, who are you talking to and why are you talking to that person on the phone, is already setting up a situation that at the beginning of a relationship may seem to some as innocuous, but that individual is not respectful of the integrity of that other person's life. And as such is already encroaching upon his or her own personal freedom to choose how to act and how to be. That is, I believe, the setup for abuse. And because we live in a society where, and we might say that has a culture of abuse and violence, we seem desensitized to some of these things and could hardly tell when they're happening to us. I think that that is crucial. And I believe that there is something there. So when preachers, Sister Chan would have me say, have difficulty in defining abuse, or when a counselor or an educator or family life educator may have difficulty defining what abuse is, then you see you have a system that is accommodating to this, and therefore the proliferation of these issues in our families and in our society. So let me talk briefly, though, about some of the explanations that are given. We might say causative factors. If I were to say causative factors, each one I give, I would say, is a simplistic model for explaining abuse and violence. One, we talk about the the psychiatric model. So people abuse because they have low impulse control, or people abuse because they have intermittent explosive personality or something of the sort, or people abuse because of some other mental health problem, or because they're under the influence of some substance or withdrawal from that substance. So the irritability level rises, and so they strike out, creating this scenario that often brings them to our attention. So that's called the psychiatric model. Well, I think there is something to that. I believe some people have explosive personality. Some people have low impulse control. So anything they think, they will do. So if they think that they should hit you, they will hit you, because they're not able to stop themselves from doing it, as well as somebody who has the ability to stop themselves. As we say, they have better impulse control. We can talk about the ecological model. The ecological model is a sort of systemic model that is maybe used to say that in our environment, in our society, from a systems perspective, we recognize that abuse and violence are all around us. A woman called me some time ago, and she told me she would like premarital counseling. So I was keenly waiting for the punchline. She told me she wanted counseling with her boyfriend because he is a little aggressive. Now, I don't particularly like to do premarital therapy. Premarital education is different in my mind from premarital therapy. If you have to do in-depth work like that before you get married, it might be better not to get married, but neither would I tell people whether or not they should get married. But she's telling me, so I'm listening to the story. So he has hit her before. He has struck out before. He has done that thing to her. So she is afraid. She is scared, but she loves him dearly. So I asked her to tell me more about the situation. I was sort of triaging, deciding whether or not it was maybe even a good fit and whether or not I had the time. But I was teasing out from her what was going on. And it turned out that he was really a violent person toward her, and they had fights and everything else. But she was somehow not seeing it as very significant. In fact, when I asked her to talk about it and I asked her why she still wanted to get married to somebody who she thought was doing all of those things, she said she loved him. She loved him a lot, and she thinks that everything is fine, but it's just this little thing. So I asked her to tell me about her father and if she has seen him commit acts of violence. And then I learned that he was in prison for acts of violence committed against others, including people in the family. So that this young lady grew up in a culture of violence. For sure, she has seen it a whole lot, and therefore was more accommodating to violence from others. So you might call that the ecological model. And I think that there is a lot that can be said in the experiences of many people regarding this. And then there is the patriarchy model. The patriarchy model is the model that assumes that in many societies around the world, and we would say 75% of the cultures of the world subscribe to this way of being, that the man is dominant. The dominant man and a subservient woman therefore begs for a relationship where the man is above and the woman is subservient to him. The old social system placed men in a superior position to women. So like the feminists used to ask in the late 1960s and 1970s, and some of the researchers, why do men abuse women? And the answer comes back all the time: because they can. Men abuse women because they can. Now, I hear you, Dr. Ocho. It is not true that only men abuse women, because there are many women that abuse men. But in a patriarchal society, and we would boast that ours is, and the Caribbean no less, that you tend to have this view that the man is superior. I was talking to my mechanic many years ago in a certain island in the Caribbean, and he told me that just having gotten married, that I needed to ensure that the wife knows who wears the pants. And he told me what he did to his wife very early in the relationship, how he took her downstairs and he struck her a couple of times because he asked for breakfast. And she said she was not wanting to do breakfast that morning. He told me she got the point after that. I would say that's a patriarchy model. The man is dominant. He can call the shots. He needs to call the shots. Any man who doesn't call the shots and doesn't put his wife in his place is less than a real man. That kind of model is dominant in our society and gives men, often men, the impetus to exercise those kinds of prerogatives over women. I'll talk a little more about that. As I talk about another month, the stress factors in their lives, poverty, for example, illness, developmental problems, they are more likely to be in a position to be abused or to abuse somebody. So we know some of that would definitely be true. But then this model also imbibes some cultural norms. And we have all been part of cultural norms. For example, spare the rod and spoil the child have come down to us even in the biblical tradition. And for some people who take it very literally, they think that you have to exercise the whip in order to gain the control or the conformity of children. And the children grow up in those environments and feel they must use it too, either on their children and sometimes on their partner. You, I'm sure, have heard of the rule of thumb. The rule of thumb actually, have you ever heard of the rule of thumb? Oh yeah, we heard of the rule of thumb, okay. But the rule of thumb it has its origin, by the way, and if you was to study common parlance, you would see it goes back to an old English rule that says a man had the prerogative to spank his wife, but that the whip, right, the switch he used couldn't be thicker than his thumb. That's where you got the rule of thumb. In other words, men have that prerogative over women. They could exercise those prerogatives. So when you look at the social situational social learning model, we realize that yes, the stress factors in our society, in our environment, in our families, in our own lives could motivate us. But when we factor how that gets exacerbated with the cultural norms that we have, we see that quite often people are in a position to commit acts of violence against another and feel somewhat justified or supported in such actions. There is another model. It's called the resource model. Simply put, when people feel that they're losing power, they tend to exercise the resources that they have available to them, such as personal, social, and economic resources, in order to gain control or mastery over somebody else. And that we see to be very typical too. The man who feels inadequate in his home is more likely to walk around saying, I'm the man of this house, and to put his wife, so to speak, in her place, and thinks that his place is the superior place. Because of the inadequacy that he feels, he acts in ways to restore, if you will, the power and those kinds of resources that he needs in order to have the control he thinks he needs in a patriarchal society. So a dominant husband, for example, with low level of education, dominant but with a low level of education, who has a wife with maybe a higher level of education and good earning power, could resort to violence in order to establish his position. And then there is the exchange model, the exchange social control model. Exchange social control. Exchange theory is a sociological theory, a social psychological theory that actually says that people weigh their behaviors on the basis of benefits or costs. benefits or costs. So if I think that it is going to cost me to do something, I would think twice about doing it. If I think it will benefit me, I am more likely to do it. So I weigh my benefits against the cost. But again, this is exchange model and the social control model. When we think about social control, if I strike my wife or my child, I am likely to end up in prison. I'm likely to lose my job. I am likely to be a registered offender. And therefore, I may not strike out. So the cost associated with that is sometimes amplified by the social controls that exist in the society. However, when you look within the family, for example, there may be values in that family that may actually mitigate that cost for families. For example, if you think about the inequality between men and women, a woman may quietly bow out thinking that she is the weaker vessel. The private nature of families, we will not discuss our business with anybody. We should not discuss our business with anybody. And therefore, we will go on nurturing the cycle of violence in the family, not blowing the cover on the thing because we are trying to protect the family at all costs. And then the real man image. A real man would do this. And if a real man would do it, then I want to be a real man, and therefore I am likely to do it. So here are some factors. The psychiatric model, for example, the ecological model, the patriarchy model, the social situational, the resource model, and the exchange social control models. But when I put all of these together, each one by itself is not maybe the best explanation, but often together, maybe give us some cues as to why people would do the things they do in families. We feel enabled by the social values, and even for some of us, we think the biblical values that we have inherited historically, or the patriarchy model or the social influences that we have around us. So whatever the factors, though, here are some things that I would want to teach people. One, abuse should never be tolerated. When I say that, there are feminists who would maybe disagree with me because in saying so, I could be blaming the victim. The victimizer is not suddenly a victimizer. Usually, people are groomed into such kinds of submission and or dominance. They groom themselves into such dominance. And so sometimes they creep upon us, not suddenly. It doesn't come on like measles in the night, but it's sometimes a slow, pervasive kind of relationship strategy that happens over time, where an individual is set in a position to be dependent on another person and therefore unable to walk away from the resources that the other person has under their control. So listen, whatever else is true, we should endeavor not to accept violence from another person. If it happened once, it is likely to happen again. And you got to put your feet down, sometimes by fleeing the scene of the crime, so to speak, or having a plan of escape, something we do with all our patients who might be experiencing abuse, because they must have a plan of escape. Because many people who are attempting to escape, if they don't do a good job at it, are more likely to fall into the snare of Satan and certainly their abuser. So we got to be mindful of that, to teach people to have an appropriate plan of escape. Why? Because abuse should never be tolerated. Now, if there is abuse in families, people need to seek the help and the support, often of a counselor or a group that would help them to gain the resources and the ego strength necessary for making appropriate decisions to find themselves out of, or how to manage that relationship in a way that it would not happen again. But we know spirituality, religiosity, church, and all are not necessarily predictors of safety from abuse. In fact, around churches where people have fundamental views of religiosity, perhaps that's one of the predictors of violence in families. We got to be mindful of that. So the answer is not just to pray, we got to take action, and we got to be on guard against this thing very early in our relationships. If you are dating and a man appears to be over dominant, overbearing, where he is censorious and very critical, where he puts you down, just wait, more is coming. Therefore, we must teach ourselves and culture ourselves into saying that we will not tolerate abuse under any situation. I could say more, but I'm sure there are questions coming, and I'll be happy to answer with the rest of the panelists some of the questions that you have regarding these things. God bless you all. May he keep us safe. His will is for peace and for joy and happiness.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Fox. Thank you so much. Well received, well on point, applicable. And persons are already responding in various ways, indicating their appreciation for what you have shared with us. As Dr. Fox just indicated, we'll go to the time when you can ask questions. Elder Etwaru, are you standing by in the wings?
Yes, Elder Coffee, I'm here.
Yes. Over to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Elder Coffee, for that. Thank you, Dr. Cox, for sharing your expertise in the arena of the causative factor of abuse, etc. Here's a question that I am going to read for the panelists. It says, well, it's really not a question. It's a statement that that an audience member has written, well, that the church has to have a family unit and not a one person. Abuse/family violence is real. And if we are going out and preach, a plethora of personalities and issues will come up into the church. The church has to come up to speed. That's a statement. I am posing that to our experts to add some clarity to that statement.
Well, I would say it's true. I mean, the church has to come up, and the church is coming up. I might say we're not doing the best of job, I am sure, and in some places more or less than others. The truth is we are beginning to understand that we have lived in a patriarchal society where men have been allowed to be very dominant and to exercise that dominance and control prerogatives over women and children. But we are recognizing the ramifications of that in a society that is actually changing. Some of the movements of the last 40 years, starting with the civil rights movement, the women's movement, the men's movement, and even the Me Too movement of last year, somehow are putting people on blast, as it were, that we cannot and should not exercise such prerogatives, because if I am somebody, if I am valued and special, then the person who is my beloved is also, my children are as well. I do not have prerogatives over them. I may have a position in my family as, maybe some people like to say, a leader, but it does not give me the right to exercise coercive control or negative control over my wife and children. And if we could buy that, then some of those issues would be alleviated. But the church is now beginning to get that, but it's against the backdrop where some people feel that the religious values they see and or read in scripture is the basis for their actions. And I think many of the interpretations that people take out of scripture regarding those kinds of things are really faulty. And I think that's part of the backlash we get when we try to solve those problems in the context of church.
I just want to add to what Dr. Fox has said, because it's so good to be on a forum with you. It's too many
The
years.
privilege is mine, sir.
But I think, though, my fundamental challenge is, I think the church has to relook at family ministries. I think we have created women's ministries, and men's ministries have been developed as a response to the empowered women.
Mm-hmm.
And we have children's ministries, and we want to now fix different parts of the families, that the concept of family ministries, to my mind, has taken a back seat. And except we see the need for getting back the men, women, and the children into the family, we will continue to have empowered people who are dealing with disempowered people, and therefore the fractures will continue to be exacerbated within the context of our families.
Well, let me come back to that too, sir. Thank you. I like that. And I find myself saying so myself in another context, Dr. Ocho, when I talk with churches about family ministries. So yeah, we have that tendency to sort of fragment family interventions, as it were, in the context of church. Children's ministries, men's ministries, married couples ministry. Not that it is bad, but you're right. We don't always get to work with the whole. And it is true, according to Ludwig van Bottelonfi, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And when you consider that reality, yes, we should give more effort to working with families and engaging whole families in ministries. It would have a better effect, really, if we were to do it right. So I just wanted to comment. I wanted to underline what you said. I appreciate that too.
Just one, listen to me. I applaud you, gentlemen. I applaud you. We are on the same page with that. For long, I have been canvassing, and maybe I might say as anti-women's ministry, the church is too fragmented in that area of working with the family. Men are part of the family, women, children, all together, and our resources are spread too thinly. And then you have the same woman got to go to the children's program and to the women's ministry and to the community service and to the all of it within the context of what she has to do. And so it's losing its impact. I think our resources could be better handled in the exact way that your great gentleman has just described it. Excellent. We're on the same page in that.
Thank you, Dr. Fox and Dr. Ocho and Sister Bev for contributing clarity to that question. We have two more questions. We will take this one here now from our viewing audience. Can culture be a causative factor of abuse? Example, do you think that the Caribbean culture perpetuates abuse? To our panelists.
Yes. Yes, it has. And again, when I grew up in it, I did not see it as perhaps I see it today, all right? Some people accuse me of using long polysyllabic words. And you know why? Because I grew up in a culture where they taught me verbal ability, and I was whipped to learn words, long words. And so I cannot even find the simple ones to use because, you know what I'm saying, that every teacher in a school had a whip, the principal had one too, and at the drop of a hat, everybody would get it if they so decided. Not that it maybe didn't serve me bad so much, because my parents had one too, by the way, and everybody, it seemed, had one. I saw pieces of wood with nails in my neighbor's yard, so to speak, and their daughter was nailed essentially to the cross, where I saw blood oozing from earlobes because they were bitten, where a child was thrown inside from outside. And yes, that was very typical. Nobody called the police. Nobody raised an issue. It was part of the culture. But I should say in the most enlightened societies, no less, such as America, we might assume that those things are not real, but that would be a fallacy, because it's a culture of abuse almost anywhere you go in the Western world, and maybe in the Eastern world for sure. So it exists around us. So when you live in such a culture, it is easy actually to exercise those kinds of actions and behaviors toward others. We must confess. And the Caribbean culture, no less. I mean, if you've studied the work of Simi in 1946 and Rodman in 1971, that talk about the characterization of family in the Caribbean, you would see that they talked about the subjugation of the will of children and harsh parental discipline. Now, I think that is more endemic to people who are underclass or the poor of people, but it is also true that is a pretty generalized way of being, and it was more so, I'm sure, in the past, but it's still so in our Caribbean context.
I think this continues the complexities that we have to contend with. So that from the Caribbean perspective, I guess, having studied in the US, our approach to theology is totally different. The very liberal kind of US and UK approach to theology. So you would find that we take the Bible very literally. And here we have David in the book of, is it Psalm, who says, or Proverbs, Solomon says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of the child, but the rod of correction drives it far away. Now, we also take as a given, do not spare the rod and spoil the child. Now, these are theological underpinnings that would have informed and influenced our understanding of the serious role of parents and children. Now, you move away from that now and you look at in the US, and for more being more specific context, and there is the sense of children have rights, and therefore with the sense of rights, there isn't a commensurate level of responsibility. So with that rights come freedom, and therefore what we are having an almost anarchic kind of situation that we have to contend with, and therefore we are conflicted then with, do we hold on to the nuances and to the theological foundations that we hold on to very dearly, and hold on to the psychologists who will tell us that if you hit a child, you're abusing the child. And therefore, I think what this requires then is, how do we strike the balance in an attempt when psychologists are trying to help us to recognize that there's a difference between punishment and discipline. Whereas within the context of the Caribbean, it's an interchangeable term. So, I mean, the cultural nuances must now be juxtaposed against a more enlightened understanding of what is required and what do we want as a society. And I think that there is no easy answer, because there would continue to be disparate thoughts and postures, except there's a willingness to create greater levels of understanding and redefining what we expect as a society and as children of God. Yeah.
If I'm, well, Mr. Edward, so just
Yes,
let
I'm
me
here.
just say how awesome that intervention was in terms of our culture. The culture is also influenced so markedly by what we have learned in the church, as in terms of the relationship. Okay, thy husband shall rule over thee in Genesis. Okay, and that is taken so literally. In addition to that, well, my story, I was called to talk to a young lady who she was in her 20s, but she already had 6 children. And on the telephone, I was telling, you're 60, you're 24, 25, you have 6 children. And she interrupted me and said, well, and the Bible said that I must submit myself to my husband. Well, this is what I got for it. The sad reality, her situation was so grave, she died by the end of the week before I had my second talk with her. Then at another time, doing another intervention, they came to me, the woman sat down, and before the guy said anything, before I said a word, the husband said, and a woman must submit herself to her husband, okay? And I must rule over her. The conversation hadn't started, but just to say how these, and another one, a lady left the presentation a couple of us had, and in relation to those texts that you mentioned there in Proverbs, and she said, y'all think y'all gonna take away from me my God-given rights, okay, to beat my child? Not a bit of it. And she walked out of the meeting, all right? And so, yes, these traditional cultural positions need to be redefined in the context, okay, of when and how it was written. You know, how did this whole notion of beating and spanking children that in that way enter into Solomon's world? Okay, that's what they knew best. The impact of slavery and the Egyptians. All right. At that time, you know, that's what they knew and that's what they did. How do we refine that without breaking and violating our biblical perspective, you know, and violating God? So you're perfectly right, okay? That's part of our cultural heritage that is with us until today and has the impact of violence. They take the biblical passages, isolate them, and use them to support the madness they do in their relationship with their partners and with their children.
Every now and then I tell a story. It goes like this, and I'll say, so the woman used to beat the man, and she had him running all over the house. And every time she would hit him, he would say, "Take that," so that his friends would think he was the one doing it. Now, when I say that story, the people smile or laugh. And one day she had him cornered and he was under the bed and so on. And she's saying, "Come out of there, come out of there." And, you know, and he is saying, "No." I said, "Come out of there." And she's hitting him. "No." And then he got enough nerve and he said to her, "Listen," he said, "I am the man of this house. And if I said I'm not coming out, I'm not coming out." Now we say that and we laugh, right? But then I ask people, was he the man of his house? And people say, no. For you see, being man of the house, where our mind goes, often the case. It's dominance, it's subjugation. And that's where we go. So whatever else we say, it is really difficult to correct the notions we have. So when in the Caribbean mind, we say, you got to let her know who wears the pants kind of thing. We know where that is going. There is the belief. So it's not that it is doing despite to a biblical mandate. It is actually informing the biblical mandate, how we act or how we were trained to act, how we were socialized to act. Like, for example, many people would read Ephesians chapter 5, but they would always start in verse 23, "Wives, submit yourselves to your husband." But the text begins in verse 22 that says, "Submitting yourselves one to another in the fear of God." But because that is not part of our etiquette, so to speak, we don't see that part, that text. We start with 23, but not 22. So you might call that personality truth. We gravitate toward truth based on our personality, on our social cultural mores, right? And therefore it's difficult to change such actions and behavior. God wants us to love our children. Now, I cannot say that every time a parent maybe would strike a child that it is abusive. I will not go that far. But I would say most of the times when we want to inflict pain or punishment on a child, we are angry and are really not doing discipline. We are doing anger. We are manifesting anger toward the child. So the two things may be different, but it's hard to strike that balance. But neither would I prescribe it because of the untoward circumstances that could happen when a parent is maybe doing their best job at disciplining a child through the use of the whip, because the worst have happened in those cases too. So I feel that we could teach people to do the same thing using different methods. But I know that is shaped by the new cultural norms that exist mostly in the part of the world where I now live. But we, as Dr. Ocho was saying, striking that balance is a really, really difficult thing. But if we start with abuse is any behavior that is not respectful of the integrity of another human being. If I respect my integrity as a human being, the best thing I can do for my child is to teach that child to have respect for their own. And the best way to teach that is to demonstrate it toward them by not disrespecting them, whatever the means is to disrespect them.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. Thank you, Dr. Ocho. Thank you, Sister Beverly Chan, for adding some clarity to that statement/question from our listening audience. We now have room for one more question. And this is going to go live. We're going to have a live person ask the questions. I see someone's hand is up. So that person is going to ask the question. Go ahead.
Good evening, panelists. Good evening, audience, viewers. I realize our theme is psychological and physical abuse and the church. Now, I want to know if there's any tool that Guyana in particular, because I've noticed Ms. Beverly Chan is from Guyana, social worker. If there's any particular tool that is being used to detect psychological abuse, when persons come to you, what is it you use to determine what are some of the psychological things that are showing up, and how do you treat those things from a psychological perspective?
Our panelists, I'm sorry, I'm going to interject for just a brief second here. Before you answer, I just want Dr. Fox to know that his camera is off. That may be intentional, or it may be by communication error, but Dr. Fox, just letting you know your camera is off, unless that's your choice. Thank you. You all may go ahead. All right, seems he was unaware. All right, we can see you now. We can see you now, Dr. Fox.
I made no change.
All right, well, you're back though. Something happened, you're back.
Thank you.
All right, great. Go ahead with the question, any of the panelists.
Okay. I engage mercilessly in cognitive therapy, okay? However, when somebody comes to me for the very first time, they are more or less mentally and emotionally spent. That is, it has been a while since they've been experiencing, whatever kind of abuse it was. They are confused. They're looking for a starting point, okay? They're afraid of how they may come over. They're trying to be politically correct in what they say. So the first thing I say, make it light for them, okay? I know they are emotionally, mentally, and psychologically entwined in all of this, regardless of what kind of abuse it is. And I will say to them, out of my own question, how are you doing? The first response is, I am okay. Generally, I haven't had anybody so far, maybe I can't remember, saying, well, I am terrible and I'm not feeling well. They say, I'm okay. Then my next question, tell me about what okay means. And they're parked. They're immediately parked. They cannot describe okay. But the first thing I do, I encourage them, no, I don't know where to start. Whatever I said, listen, you just start. You just talk. And I would sit there, okay, maybe clarifying, giving them support, and they will talk for about 1 hour and a half or more. And by the time they are finished, they are emotionally and psychologically relieved. They just wanted at that point in time, they just wanted a safe place to offload everything without being judged. I hardly do much in the first session, actually. But you can see them at the end of the brief. I try to summarize if I'm hearing correctly, all right? And that session will usually end asking them a principal thing. Tell me, what do you want? What do you want? And they will begin to talk about some of the things they want. We don't go into a lot of how, but just what they want. And at the end of 3 hours in just those 2 aspects of the conversation, all right, I said, how are you feeling right now? And they are so emotionally and mentally relieved. They take a deep breath and they walk on. So they come to you very cluttered. This is long. And let me tell you something, when I hear the years that they have been involved in this and been suffering this, I say to myself, I wonder to myself if they know what it will take to move beyond this. But I don't tell them that, okay? Right? For Adventists, right? If I'm working with Adventist persons, I generally don't even pray before I start. I pray for me, I prepare before they come, right? And I will leave. And then something I would just ask, once I know their questions, you get it out. Say, tell me something. Where is God in all this? They don't even know. Okay. If it's a non-Adventist, right, you can pick up whether they're Hindus or Muslims or whoever they be, somewhere along the conversation, you can pick up, they have an affinity to something out. Anyway, this is not a conversation. So, I mean, I'm talking to the expert, I'm talking to you, okay, right? So from an emotional point of view, okay, right? That's relief. Both psychological, it's not a cure, but it's immediate relief that they came looking for. They more often come when things are real bad, when in most cases, if not all, they are mentally divorced. Sometimes they're mentally, emotionally divorced. So pulling that back is not a real an easy thing, right? Sometimes you find that they are willing, sometimes they're not willing. A couple walked into me, right? And the wife looked at him and said, why you bring me here now? When I was telling you, let's go all the years, you never come, right? So what's the purpose of this? She was already emotionally, mentally, and now they're moving towards physical separation. When you see they reach the divorce court, they have been gone a long time ago. Okay, so I am not a psychologist, okay? I don't pretend to be, but cognitively giving people cognitive, giving them information and that leads to action, all right? I find very, very extremely helpful. In matter of fact, in one case, a lady met me on the road after a presentation, a nurse this was, and she said, Mrs. Chan, if I knew that before, I would have been better in my relationship, but it's too late now. I'm already divorced. So again, from a cognitive level, giving people information that leads towards action, all right, is what I really do. And I walk with them during that journey. So, and that's where, of course, in terms of timing, it all depends on who, what, the willingness, the circumstances, and so on. But from that perspective, that's what I do. Okay, the psychologists can probably help here, and Dr. Fox and Dr. Oscar can tell you more about how that is identified. But that's as far as I go. Okay, and so far, it has been working. Thank you. Can the others help?
Well, there are assessment instruments for violence in
Yes.
families, conflict tactics,
Yes.
scale, and others. So some would use those. But a good assessment, triage, as you're doing, I mean, I think is perhaps mostly what's necessary. You got to remember that people would not readily want to talk about this. And by the way,
Exactly.
if a couple comes in, if a couple were to be in there together and abuse is happening, you may assume that the woman or the man may not feel very open to discuss what's going on. That's how the cycle of violence is maintained in secrecy, like mold, it grows in the dark. Therefore, if you suspect that, you would want to sort of do individual sessions at some point to do a better assessment. Otherwise, you will not get thoroughly open answers, and therefore you may not be able to solve the problem, right? So that is one of the ethics usually of a family therapist. If you're doing an assessment for abuse, and let's say you suspect that a woman or the man is being abused, you would want to have separate sessions at some point to do a thorough assessment. All right, so that is crucial. And then in addition to that, you are looking at some of the actions and behaviors. If a couple comes in to a therapist, the therapist is looking at who speaks first, where they sit in relation to each other. Those are things I would be looking at, right? Who answers the question when I ask? If she answers the question only after glancing at him, as if to say, let me check to see if this is okay for me to say now, then it gives me some indication that the woman is being oppressed in some way. So there are lots and lots of verbal and nonverbal cues that I would pay attention to in the room while this is happening, right? And as was mentioned, if for example, I were to know these people, but it seems now that I'm seeing new behaviors where she is pretty silent, reticent on certain issues, doesn't want to speak when I ask questions. She's covering up maybe wounds, if you will. Those kinds of indications may speak loudly to the possibility of abuse and violence happening in families. If the man is always dominant and always wants to be the one speaking and doesn't want to give her the opportunity to answer questions, especially sensitive questions, again, this may indicate to me that they may be in jeopardy here. So hence the need for the individual sessions where I at least can share with her a plan of escape. And a plan of escape doesn't mean I want you to leave your husband. We don't tell people to leave, but a plan of escape is if in the event this man is acting very violent toward you such that your life, you feel, or safety is threatened, you should have a plan of escape. You should have a bag packed. You should know where you're going. You should have a means to get out of there at a moment's notice. Otherwise, you would maybe wake up dead, or you would die so swiftly when you wake up in the morning. Then you realize you're dead.
It is for that same reason, Dr. Fox, I really don't see them together. Very, very rare. And I allow them, if both are interested, I allow them to decide who will come first. But seeing them together is really not a hallmark of mine.
Right. As a family therapist, so we tend to caution ourselves against that approach. But here's
Yes.
what I'm saying. If two people are going to come in to see me, I
Yes.
do not want to see one first, get a
No.
story, and then see the other. So if I see them together, then I could always separate them from time to time and see one and the other. But if I do individual counseling with them, I can't do couples counseling with them, but I could do couples counseling with them, and I could still do some individual sessions with them. So that's the better approach. So I would rather see them first, except I know for sure there is abuse, then I maybe wouldn't do that. But if I don't know and they come in as a couple and I suspect those things are going on, I would call for the individual session maybe the next time and manage like that. So I hear you.
Yes. Right.
Dr. Ocho?
Yeah, I think every situation is context specific, and to the questioner who would have been asking about whether there are tools and so on, the reality is within a helping relationship, one has to look at, and was very clearly stated both by Dr. Fox and Mrs. Chan, one has to look at the nonverbal cues, which will be extremely important, and know how to as it were, explore, and a word we will use, probe the issues, so that we are not looking at something that is very prescriptive, because each situation has its own unique challenges and representation, and therefore experience and the Holy Spirit will go a long way in directing you how to treat with every situation.
Sure.
Thank you so very much. Oh, what a day. What a evening
What a
we've had
session.
together. What a session. Awesome indeed. Powerful men and women of God presenting to us, sacrificing your time and being committed to this process. God has promised, though, that his word would never return to him void, because it is his word that has been shared here. We serve a loving God, and a God who wants to see lives transformed, a God who wants to have us exemplify the mind of Christ in this world of so much difficulty and challenge. Thank you, everyone who have been here, for staying with us and being committed to this process. At this time, to take the gratitude to another level, Brother Nigel Schultz, our Vice President for Community, would take us into a vote of thanks. Thereafter, Pastor Paul would conclude in prayer. Over to you, Brother Schultz. Thank you, Brother Edwaru, for facilitating the questions.
Brother Coffee, Brother Dennis, just
Yes.
one moment before we do
Yes.
that, I just
Yes.
want to compliment my two facilitators this afternoon. They were awesome. I just want to say it was a great experience for me, and they did an excellent job. I'm proud of them. I felt the passion of Dr. Ocho and all the stories of that were told. This has been very meaningful for me, and I applaud you, gentlemen. And it was a pleasure for me to share this moment with you. And finally, to those in the audience who would be listening, congratulate you for staying towards the end of this. And here's my wish for those who took time to stay with us, is that if you can take away one idea, just one, from any of the presentations and make it a reality in your life, give you a new perspective, just one, let me welcome you to the first day of the rest of your life. It has been a pleasure and a privilege, and I want to thank you for the privilege of your time. Thank you, Dr. Fox and Dr. Noel. Lovely, great. And when Elder Coffee, I always love when men lead these processes, okay? And when we are on the same page, it's even healthier for us. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed.
Indeed. Pleasure was mutual.
Definitely, it was really great.
Actually, I sat back, took my notes, and it was really touching. And I want to thank our presenters and panelists. Definitely Dr. Curtis Fox, Dr. Ocho. Dr. Fox was just cool, calm, and collective and delivering, while Dr. Ocho is always passionate, and I really love that as well. And Ms. Chan, you very well, you presented your case. I really, what should I say? It was very informative and direct, also case by case basis. I love that. So I want to thank everyone, and I don't want to forget everybody. So I list them also. I want to thank SAP team, SAP executive team, the program participants, Pastor Coffee, Elder Coffee, and I also want to thank Ricky. Ricky Eduardo, you asked a tough question as well. Roblin Bailey, Sister Roblin Bailey, and the special music as well. I do not want to overlook anyone. Definitely, we cannot overlook our tech team. Our tech team, Pastor Lowe, Eston Brown, Dr. Julius Daniel. We have the union president with us, Miss Janelle Canterbury. And I forgetting her last name as well, but the secretariat for the union. Definitely we have some esteemed guests. Dr. Faz, I'm seeing you. I cannot forget CUC, our dear CUC. And I'm seeing Debbie Gibson, our faithful supporter, Pastor Kurt, and definitely the Hardy family. I want to thank all of you all. But guess what? I saved the best for last. This is it, everyone. We having a food forum, and please follow me. We having a food forum, and this is how it goes. The fourth forum is broken. The fourth forum is broken, bleeding, belittling while ministering. The fourth forum is called broken and follow me, bleeding, belittling while ministering. What is all about? Ministering to and holding accountability to those who struggle with abusive tendencies in church leadership position. Get it? The fourth forum, it will be broken. What we want to capture is, and I'm reading from my phone, bleeding, belittling while ministering. Ministering to and holding accountability to those who struggle with abusive tendencies in the church leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, our supporters throughout the world, we want all of you to come on board, join this SAP. And by the way, they are hearing us. And let this be a lesson. Each one teach one so we can reach one. Thank you very much and God bless. Good evening. I'm going to hand you over, and everyone be safe and have a good night. Pastor Lowe, everything is over to you.
Thank you so much, Elder Schultz. And again, thanks to all those who joined us today in participation, as well as our guests. We have to give God praise for what we've just observed. And this is the objective of SAP indeed, that we would allow God to work in and through us for the edification of the body. We have the great commandment from God, what we reference as the greatest commandment, that is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, and mind, and to love our neighbor as Christ loves the church. And it's that simple. If we can do so by the power of the Holy Spirit, there'd be a lot less hurt and abuse in the church and in the family. Let us pray. Father, we just want to thank you, dear God, for being our greatest example. We want to thank you for what we heard through your servants, dear God, and for the education and edification provided from you through their lips. Father, we pray that all that we've heard today would be seeds planted in our conscience and would bear fruit in due time, dear God. Fruit that would break cycles of dysfunction, fruit that would break cycles of violence, fruit that would break cycles of abuse, that your people and your church would be healed. Father, we want to thank you, dear God, for the provision of your grace and for the unlimited potential and what you give, dear God, in not just life, but life abundant. We thank you, O Father, and we ask these things in the precious name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you all for joining us once again. And I believe we may have a final before I close things out officially. I'll see if any of the administrators have a final word. If not, that probably will be it for us. And we just want to thank you. So the mic is open if there's another admin that needs to share in closing. All right, and I believe I was told earlier that I would have the last word. So with that, I want to just again thank everyone and pray that you all have a blessed and wonderful evening. God bless you and keep you.